Comedy movies today are broken. The solution lives in the 2000s, but not for the reasons you think. When you look at how comedies from the 2000s were actually made, the explanation becomes a lot less obvious. After digging deep behind the scenes, I was surprised to learn that you can never trust the end credits for a comedy movie ever again, and that some of the biggest comedies almost missed out on the most memorable performances because the studios didn't want to cast those actors. When you think of the movies playing in theaters this decade, what comes to mind? Probably the Marvel movies, Avatar sequels, and legacy sequels such as Jurassic Park and Top Gun. But can you even name 10 comedy movies from this decade? But think about the 2000s. There were tentpole films like Star Wars, Harry Potter, and Lord of the Rings, but there were also a ton of comedy movies like The Hangover, Superbad, Wedding Crashers, and Dodgeball. So what happened? Well, the Marvel movie big budget domino effect spread like wildfire across studios, and we started seeing less and less of these mid-budget comedies to the point of near extinction. You'd be lucky to see even one of these kinds of comedies released this year. This decade, comedies only make up roughly 5% of total releases, compared to 20% or 1 in every 5 in the 2000s. What's even rarer is to see a comedy be exactly what it was in the 2000s. A straight comedy with the humor alone being the sole focus of the film. Nowadays, these big budgeted films are being played off as comedy, but this?
You think I'm a movie star? Well, I am, but I am also an Eternal.
Doesn't even belong in the same conversation as this.
Hey, a little housewarming to new beginnings.
Thanks. Actually, I gave this to you for your wedding.
This model?
No, this exact one.
And as much of a breath of fresh air that Deadpool and Wolverine was, I couldn't help but think of how much funnier the movie would have been if they weren't constrained to a superhero movie. And that's the thing. Instead of relying on existing IP, the legendary mid-budget comedies of the 2000s relied on star powers such as Vince Vaughn, Will Ferrell, and Seann William Scott as their IP. It didn't matter what the movie was about. These actors were so legendary that no matter what, you knew if one of them was starring, that the movie was going to be hilarious. But Vince Vaughn, Will Ferrell, and Seann William Scott are also connected in a surprising way that made 2000 comedies so great. Because without this, there's no question. The 2000s wouldn't have been anywhere near as good as they were for comedy. And this isn't just limited to comedy movies, because this is prevalent across every industry. Because love him or hate him, you would have no idea who Eminem was if Dr. Dre hadn't discovered him. If you're a football fan, have you noticed how the Philadelphia Eagles are good almost every single year? That's not happening without general manager Howie Roseman. And you can apply the same principle across every professional sports franchise. So what do Dr. Dre and Howie Roseman have in common? An elite eye for talent and an ability to make strong, calculated risks. As far as how this relates to Vince, Will, and Sean, all three were viewed as massive risks moments before they blew up comedy movies. Seann William Scott was working minimum wage jobs and struggling to get by before casting director Joseph Middleton found him for American Pie. But he, and the rest of the cast for that matter, would soon become stars. Vince Vaughn and Will Ferrell were viewed as such a liability that old school director Todd Phillips had to fight the studio to allow them to star in the film.
Vince wasn't a huge comedy guy at that time, you know. I remember having to convince DreamWorks to put Vince in old school, and Will Ferrell even, you know, he'd been on Saturday Night Live, but he hadn't done Elf yet.
And you know who the casting director for old school was? Joseph Middleton as well. But this wasn't the only time that Todd Phillips had to fight the studio. To get The Hangover made with Zach Galifianakis, Ed Helms, and Bradley Cooper, he forfeited his salary because the studio wanted established movie stars, but he believed so strongly in his casting decisions. And given the film grossed over $460 million off of a $35 million budget and spurred 2 sequels, making it over $1 billion franchise, I'd say things ended up well for all parties. And it doesn't stop there. Thanks to Judd Apatow, actors James Franco, Seth Rogen, and Jason Segel all got their start on Freaks and Geeks before dominating 2000s comedy movies. And as icing on the cake, Apatow would also find McLovin actor Christopher Mintz-Plasse and Emma Stone for Superbad, which was both of their first film roles ever. The casting of 2000s comedies was fundamentally different from modern times, because back then, casting was based on merit and not who had the most Instagram followers.
You know, I'm talking to them about how I'm going to delete my Instagram, and they're like, just so you know, when I'm casting a movie with some producers, they hand me a sheet with the amount of collective followers I have to get of the cast that I cast. So if you delete your Instagram and I lose those followers, understand that these are the kinds of people that I need to cast around you.
And that's another hidden reason why comedy movies boomed in the 2000s. There were several elite eyes and trust for talent. But this next reason is by far the sneakiest and will make you question what the end credits of a comedy movie even mean. Because several iconic 2000s comedy movies had writers and or directors who never saw their name in the end credits, including Elf, Bad Santa, Wedding Crashers, and Bruce Almighty. Steve Faber and Bob Fisher are listed as the writers of Wedding Crashers, but you probably didn't know that Hangover writers Scott Moore and John Lucas rewrote the script behind the scenes. And they did this for several comedies during this era. Scott Armstrong, whose work includes Old School, Road Trip, and Starsky and Hutch, rewrote Elf without receiving any credit. But he also rewrote Bad Santa, which is the single craziest example of a comedy with hidden, uncredited talent. Because it wasn't just Scott who secretly worked on the film. The original story for Bad Santa came from Joel and Ethan Coen, the guys behind The Big Lebowski and Fargo. But wait, it doesn't even stop there, because Hangover, Road Trip, and Old School director Todd Phillips even came on board to direct several scenes of the movie. And yet neither in the end credits, nor on IMDb, will you see any of the names I listed as writers or director of the film. And Bruce Almighty perfectly illustrates why 2000s comedies work so well. Judd Apatow did an uncredited rewrite of the film, but more importantly, Apatow and his inner circle were the foundation of what perfected this era for comedy. Because outside of his uncredited rewrites, Apatow leaned on his people to strengthen the movies he wrote and directed, including The 40-Year-Old Virgin, Knocked Up, and Funny People. This same collaborative approach extended to the movies he produced as well, including Anchorman, Superbad, and Pineapple Express. He's been outspoken publicly on the importance of collaboration, not just with writers and directors, but also with actors through the use of improv. And in his masterclass that I bought many years back, he spoke about how he'd invite all of his friends to the table reads to make sure that they got the best jokes for the final script. A friend group that included Anchorman and Step Brothers director Adam McKay, comedian Gary Shandling, and his former roommate, Adam Sandler. Meaning these scripts were being punched up by the top minds in the industry. Hidden collaboration was what defined 2000s comedies. Writers, directors, and producers were constantly shaping these films without receiving any credit. Almost every great comedy from this era was a behind-the-scenes competition between the best minds in comedy to see who could lift the film to its highest potential. But these collaborations went much deeper than the humor itself, because this final reason hasn't just gone missing from comedy, but literally every single genre. Let's look at some comedies from the 2000s that we haven't discussed yet. Mean Girls follows a girl struggling to navigate the social hierarchy of high school. Extract centers around a guy maneuvering a job he hates and his struggling marriage. And Meet the Parents takes us through the anxiety and awkwardness of meeting your future in-laws for the first time. Do you notice the unique sense of relatability and universal appeal to these plot lines? But it wasn't just limited to these films, because 2000s comedies consistently showed us the realism of high school, college, how people behave on the job, and so many familiar situations that make us human. And you also saw it in the dialogue.
Now, Jim, let me handle this. These are my people.
They're gay?
No, you bleeding imbecile. They have style. They're cultured. They're sophisticated.
So they're gay.
Maybe not the most politically correct, but it was honest to how humans actually speak. Jenna Ortega really hit the nail on the head when she said, "The business that we work in is so touchy-feely. Everybody wants to be politically correct, but I feel like in doing that, we lose a lot of our humanity and integrity because it lacks honesty." And it's funny, I remember at Thanksgiving talking with a couple of my aunts and uncles about how South Park is ironically the most accurate description of how elementary school students actually talk.
I think I know the answer, Mr. Garrison. Shut up, fat boy! Hey, don't call me fat, you Jew!
But beyond this, even if comedy movies of the 2000s seemed like they were only made for specific demographics, they ended up accidentally being movies that everyone could enjoy because they were rooted in honest, human experiences. Even if they sometimes broke the rules of reality, the emotional truth always prevailed. Vince Vaughn really nailed it when he spoke of this very subject on Hot Ones.
An IP was a girl's turning 16, or I'm gonna cut school. You know, life situations, or Old School. What if I got to go back and be in a fraternity now at this stage of the game. The people in charge don't want to get fired more so than they're looking to do something great. So they want to kind of follow a set of rules that don't really translate. But as long as they follow them, they're not going to lose their job because they can say, well, look, I made a movie off the board game Payday, so you can't, even though the movie didn't work, you can't let me go.
2000s comedies worked so well because they showed us the raw and honest truth of humanity, and they gave us both familiar people and worlds without relying on spectacle. So if this is the case, why haven't the studios brought back these mid-budget 2000s style comedies? Well, the biggest obstacle currently standing in their way is Marvel, and I explain exactly why this is here.